Welcome back, venturers. It's time for another discussion about VNs. I am Emar, and together with Tauros, we will talk today about bad endings. Well, to be precise, I don't mean the quality of an ending, but rather the endings that were specifically done to showcase a bad outcome to a given situation or story. Tauros, as an expert in these, why don't you give us a brief definition of what makes a bad ending?
Hey, don't count out the stuff where we talk about endings we hated. That's still on the table.
Okay, fair enough.
But yes, typically, when you think about visual novels with their bad ends, well, a bad ending, you could say, is one type of ending to a story that's not fully intentional to be a satisfying conclusion. Usually you see these a lot as a form of, hey, you messed up some sort of gameplay aspect, go back and try again. So this necessitates a visual novel with choices or options involved. And a very common way is that you made the wrong choice, and then you get, a few more scenes and lines leading to your main character's failure, and then the screen goes to black and whatnot. And basically you just have to reboot a save and try making different dialogue choices, different actions. I mean, some visual novels, maybe some more in-depth aspects. But the point being is that in this puzzle of a visual novel story, you made some wrong, quote unquote, choices. And so this bad ending is usually meant to be a little bit more than just a reminder of your failure.
True. And some bad endings can be as complex as there is a long period of time from the choice you made to the consequence of it. And others are immediate. So you made a wrong choice, but then go back.
Like, if you consider an action VN, let's say the main character is in a fight with a rival or something, and it's like the rival throws a punch at your head, and it's like, do I dodge to the side or do I counterattack? And then you pick one option, and it's like, no, you messed up, and you get punched in the face, and you're a loser. And then it's as simple as that. You just go back, you pick the other option, and now the story can play out as intended, I suppose. Or it can be as far-reaching as, the classic relationship points aspect, where the main character may be talking with a heroine, and based on how you respond to her dialogue, it may affect how much she likes you. And then many, many hours later, there might be a check of how many heroine points you have as a measure of how much you've built up your, interest in each other. And if it's too low, you get the bad ending. And there's no real easy way to do that except going back and making sure that you hit those points to build up that affection meter so that you can clear and get the good ending later.
True. Some VNs have more complex systems than others. Some use track points. Some have a specific singular choice that may lock you out of a good ending. Another example of the combat-oriented choices were in Muramasa, in which you had a combat scenario in which you had to do in a succession 4 choices, and only one correct sequence allowed you to progress. Any other resulted in death and a bad ending. So it depends on the situation. It can be as simple as make a correct prediction between a counter and a dodge, or in case of Muramasa, it can be as complex as cue a sequence of moves in a combat scenario. You better be prepared.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, some titles get pretty creative with how they handle it. Like there's also the ever-present flags you may see, where you make a choice and behind the scenes the visual novel adjusts a variable to show that you went down this path, and who knows how much later down the line they'll check to see if that flag is raised or not, in a sense, if you made that decision or not, and then adjust your path onto a good or bad ending as needed. That's one reason I really liked
Yes.
Tsukihime and Fate Stay Night as one of my first few visual novel titles. I really like that whole analytical side of thing, and those two visual novels are packed with all sorts of flags and decisions and various ways the story could play out depending on the choices you make. That makes them very
Yes,
complicated,
exactly. The
and
one.
yeah, and for some people, I'm sure it was
Sure.
pretty overwhelming at the time. But I'm very glad. I really enjoyed it.
It was probably one of the earliest example of a title that mixes both complex and trivial sequence for the bad endings. Some of them checked the flags, as you mentioned. Some of them checked whether or not this one choice you picked correctly, depending on the context, be it a combat scenario or more of a affection meter and or flags. In addition to, uniquely, Fate made bad endings something that exceeds only the immediate, because they had a very special segment that incentivizes you to hunt for all the bad endings. Probably one of my favorite idea, how to make bad endings interesting to discover and have an incentive to do so.
Mm-hmm. Like some more modern games might have an achievement system for finding some rare bad ends or for seeing every bad ending. Back to Fate Stay Night, they had the Taiga dojos every time you got a bad ending, where it'd be a joke scenario where two characters goof off and talk about the story that unfolded so far and what you need to do to go back and make the right choices, all while joking the whole while.
Yep. Exactly.
Fate Stay Night is
And,
usually, you know,
like, exactly. They made so many jokes there. Oh my god.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm just saying, they made such a funny parody of itself, as well as giving you certain hints to avoid it, right?
Yep. Because in Fate Stay Night, it's usually a heavy atmosphere. There's all sorts of serious topics and fights and all sorts of, dire situations. And then you come off the emotional high of that brutal failure where more often than not, our main character ends up dead. And then they're just goofing off with slapstick comedy in the Taiga dojo.
Yep. Exactly. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's a perfect way to lighten off and get that tension out of your heart. Mm-hmm.
And honestly, those few times in the Taiga dojo, you expect to get some sort of joke or comedy segment, but you don't. And there are few examples in which the characters are so disappointed in the protagonist, they say, dummy, make the other choice. I'm like, damn, that's actually hits even harder, honestly.
Exactly. The few times where it's really obvious which choice you should make in the story to stay alive. And and if you go down the wrong path, I remember there's at least once where they question, it's like, are you just here just to see what would happen? There's no way
Yep.
you seriously thought this was the correct decision, did you?
Yeah.
They just call you out while you're collecting all those bad endings. But still, that's the fun. That's what adds so much variety. Speaking of the extra content, there are also times where a visual novel will sneak off a little bit of foreshadowing into some random bad endings as well. I remember Root Double did. Root Double, it's a more action-focused story where there is a disaster at a nuclear power plant, and the main character and his buddies have to go in and rescue as many people as possible. And as such, with all the danger involved, there are several bad ends if you make the wrong choices. A lot of them are pretty short and direct. It's pretty much, why would you do that, you dummy, and now you're dead. But there are a few of them that give some, I wouldn't say spoilery outcomes, but they raise some serious questions and they reveal some info that you really shouldn't see coming for a long while yet. And so
Yeah,
that's all.
I have.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I have an example of that in Fate. Fate had few of the bad endings. You encounter characters that never appeared yet in a bad ending. Most famously, one of the first bad endings you can get introduces you to a servant you've never seen till this point from the temple.
Mm-hmm.
And right, and then there rises an eyebrow like, oh,
Yeah,
an intrigue here,
that's what happened
right?
to me. I got an early bad ending, and I saw a character who I had never seen until now, and I was like, "Yo, who are you?" And then dead. I was like, "Oh, okay, well."
Yeah, exactly.
And then it's many more hours before you see them again.
Exactly. Another one is something that doesn't really happen often in runs, but in the very, very, very first game, run 01, you have an opportunity to talk with a odd character, and if you keep pestering, you enter in what I would call fuck around and find out. And if you do find out, you have a very rare bad ending that showcases that this character is way more than it seems. And you get to experience that in the very first game. So that's very intriguing for the future reference in the series.
Mm-hmm. I mentioned that bad endings kind of necessitate visual novels with choices and options because, that's how you get bad endings within the player's control. But there is a whole nother world to explore if you have visual novels with gameplay aspects, like rants, like you mentioned.
You know what? Before we go there, I want to put that into question because there is a title that has neither choices nor gameplay, yet has bad endings. I'm talking specifically about X-Blaze, and now you can say I was tricky enough to redefine what a gameplay end or choices are, but ultimately this is a kinetic novel, doesn't have choices. Now, it does have a glossary system in which you can read a lore, okay? And periodically you get updates on lore in your glossary. Now, how the game determines choices and routes is how much of the lore have you investigated. So one of the earliest bad ending you can encounter is you never open the glossary whatsoever. And the game ends with a apathy is death kind of ending. You didn't know what was happening, and it just surprised you out of nowhere.
I mean, that is in a sense a form of gameplay, of how much the reader checks out the glossary. It's unconventional, like definitely. It's a very unique way of handling it. But in a sense, it's still within the player's control. You brought about this ending or a lack of an ending.
Exactly, yeah.
But that is very cool.
Yeah, it's very unique in how it twists the idea of a gameplay on or an interface you interface with to choose an ending to pursue. You check the glossary.
Yes.
Okay.
Now, when it comes to more, typical involved gameplay like rants, that's where things get a little more interesting in how to handle bad ends. Because bad endings in visual novels are very different than what you would see in video games. Like, figure a classic game like Pong or like Mario. In those, it's more of a game over. There goes your attempt, your quarter to play it, and you failed, and now that's the end of the game. Because those are stylized as games, whereas visual novels are stylized more as storytelling. And so when you when you have visual novels that are bringing in more of a gameplay side of things, it's not always easy to distinguish times when you just suck at the game and you got a game over versus potential avenues the story wants you to fall down to see a bad ending of this is how the story could fall flat on its face if you failed to save the day sort of thing. And I think that's an interesting gray area that sometimes can cause a lot of confusion. I know, God, at least one example, there was Fate Extra, which was the PSP game, which was stylized more like an action, well, not action, an RPG dungeon crawling sort of thing. And it had its gameplay moments where you controlled your servant with the health bar and the mana bar and commands and stuff. And if you ever ran out, then that was bad, and of course you get game over stuffs and you reload your saves. There were a few times sprinkled throughout the story where you would have choices of like what to do or how to respond. And out of the blue, a few of them, if you made the wrong choice, you got a game over. Because you basically died or whatever. And in a visual novel, it's like, okay, well, that comes with the territory. But this was a video game. And you're not always going to be saving at every opportunity, especially because you can't save in these dialogue moments, and you can't really see them coming. So thanks to some really silly forced story, event that's not always obvious, you might end up losing hours of grinding and gameplay.
Yeah,
that's rough.
Very true.
Because, in a video game, you would expect better than to not get one shot by some random enemy without autosaves or without saving or without any sort of warning. And so I feel like that's the kind of worst of both worlds you get out of a video game and out of a visual novel, the whole idea of a bad end. You get the worst of a video game where you lose out on all your hours of progress because it felt cheap, and you've got the whole visual novel thing where, sure, okay, it's a bad ending, but it doesn't contribute anything. It's just like 3 lines of, ugh, you die, and then it's over. So
I think that's true, especially in those long-winded RPGs in which there is a flag set up early on, yet there's so much gameplay segment in between, you can't easily rewind as you would with a VN to correct your mistakes of choices that you've picked, right?
Yes, good point. The whole fast forwarding through a VN, but you can't really fast forward through a game. You're right.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's some difficulties. It's hard to write a bad ending that doesn't feel cheap, because just like any other ending, if you want it to feel earned or deserved or satisfactory, you have to put in a lot of, literary thoughts and efforts into it. You got to think of some way to resolve it. Even if it's going to be a bad ending and it's supposed to feel unresolved, it should still feel satisfying in some way for the reader. And many times, just getting slammed with a "you die, try again," it doesn't really contribute that much. It honestly makes you wonder sometimes why they get included so many times if you're just going to have boring, nothing bad ends.
It's hard to say, right? Because you can't deny that there is some satisfaction in which the game doesn't grant you the good ending easily, right? And I'm speaking mostly on VNs, but you can extrapolate that to games as well. Because if they don't grant you good endings to characters' personal story easily, you feel more rewarded once you achieve it, right? So you brought before an example of runs, a title that could have a bad ending via gameplay. Now, funny enough, runs doesn't really have that many bad ends, doesn't really have any because they need a continuity between titles. So majority of bad ends that they do have are either immediate, a roadblock, so you chose something wrongly, so you just load and repeat, or maybe a boss fight you didn't complete with a certain time limit, for example, that leads to an alternative scenario that, again, have a brief bad ending. Now, there is a type of bad ending they do have, though. because runs being a series, they have a continuity, but that doesn't necessarily mean the side characters need to have a continuity. So a lot of the times, whether or not a side character will achieve their good ending and a conclusion to their story depends on your gameplay and how you will treat them along the way. If you neglect them, they may as well not have the best time. Let's say it like that. Right? So that's a type of a bad ending approach. I mean, good/bad ending approach that runs half. With most notably example was the most popular Sengoku runs title, utilizing the amount of time left. So you're on the clock. In that title, you need to unite the country. And there are more regions that you have time to unite peacefully. So in a matter of speaking, there will be some regions you won't be able to save. And if you are especially tardy, way more people will have a worse ending.
So it's not just a bad ending for yourself, but for, well, I mean, it's not just a bad ending for the main character, but for other supporting cast?
Exactly.
Oh dear. That's a.
So the story has a continuity and a conclusion, but whether or not those side characters from different places in the world will continue on and or had their story concluded will depend on how you treat them.
And I think that also gets into the other aspect of character-specific endings. In visual novels, I think it's somewhat common, especially in moe-geis and romanceable sorts of stories, to have your common route end with it branching into one of several different heroine routes to pursue. And then you go down those routes, and it's centered around that character. And sometimes that character route will have its own good or bad endings. And so I wonder, you have like the bad endings for heroine routes, right? And you always have to wonder, well, when you go down other heroine routes, it's like, where do those elements factor into like the true canon of the story? Are those heroines doing just fine? Did they go through the character growth that you see in their individual routes if you're on a different route? It makes a very interesting question of whether all of them are like good endings. It's like only in the context of main character and love interest, or is that good ending a bad ending for a different heroine?
I mean, well, how can I say it? The way I want to tell myself, okay, how I see it is, okay, maybe they didn't have the character development, but since I didn't enter the route, at the very least, I avoided their bad ending, okay?
Okay. The glass half full instead of
this
half
is how
empty.
I cope with it. Yes, exactly. Yep, exactly. 100%. At the very least, they avoided the worst outcome.
Oh my gosh, okay. So, I guess, Amar, how about this? What are some of your favorite bad endings from certain VNs?
Well, let me start by saying this. I, on average, don't like bad ends. I prefer having good endings over bad endings, right? I don't wish for my character suffering to appreciate when they are happy, okay? But that doesn't mean that there aren't some bad endings that stuck with me. So there are two in particular. One is from Fate. The ending named Sparks Liner High is an amazing, long-winded bad ending of what would happen if you push the protagonist to his limit in a moment that probably isn't appropriate to test that limit because you have more important things to do, right? But you are pushed to the wall, so to speak. And it has some very unique character examination, because I don't really want to say growth or development. There isn't that much time left for that, but at least retrospective and examination, yes. It's very unique and it's stuck with me for a long time.
Not to mention, we said before that bad endings usually just don't have too much thought or effort put into them, but Sparks Line or High from Fate's Day Night, you're right. It is a incredibly worthy scene of being like even in the main storyline. And the whole idea is that the developers don't want to put all of this time, money, and effort into something that only a fraction of the players will end up seeing. But on the other hand, you have something as, in a way, glorious as that scene in all of the ways it involves in the story, the characters, their relationship together. And it really gives weight to that ending. This is a situation that can only happen in this bad ending. It's not like it could happen in the main storyline, right? So seeing all of the effort put into it, giving it the time, effort, and weight it deserves really sells the entire experience to you, the reader.
Yeah, exactly. And I have another example that uses multiple perspective to ramp up the anticipation for the bad ending. And it's super weird that I remember it vividly, but it shows the quality of that bad ending. It's from School Days, oddly enough. School Days being famous for very bloody endings of how the situation can spiral out of control if you really bully and or push people to their limits, right? So in one, there is a point in the story through, I wanted to say action, but more maybe accurately is by inaction of a protagonist, the drama ramps up, then a character in question that is the subject of the bad ending gets bullied and pushed to her limit by the classmates, and it boils and boils and boils, and just before you are in for the absolute worst ending, you have one single choice to avoid it, and it's such a uplifting moment of protagonist stepping up to avoid the absolute worst fate that it really stuck with me. It still, I qualified as a bad ending just by the virtue of, oh, you definitely could have done better job earlier in the story, not to not to ramp up the drama up until the point someone was
going to
walking
snap
with a killer intent, right? Just before the snap. Exactly. So there's definitely better ways of handling it, but it's such an interesting approach to have a bad ending as an alternative to the absolute worst dead ending you could think of. And that's why probably it stuck with me the most. It's a very uplifting example of protagonist. It's very late, but you rose to the occasion, okay?
Oh my gosh.
And it was quite uplifting.
Yeah, because usually when people think of bad endings in School Days, there's, the famous, the boat one.
Yeah.
The stuff and
exactly,
whatnot that goes on. But in your case, that's like the first time I've ever heard of suggesting something different, where it was like all the meaning you said of where it gets to the final point before we get to all of the nice boat material-ish kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And just resolving it from there on out. It's that final little hook of, in a sense, a happy ending that, the protagonist and characters created, but still.
Exactly. You made the best of the very bad situation. Yeah.
Oh, I've never thought of that. That's very interesting. Oh. As for me, there's a small indie title I read called Syrup and the Ultimate Sweet. And it takes place in a fantasy land full of magic and lighthearted pastel colors that focuses on friendships and whatnot. Near the beginning, the main character finds a humanoid creature made entirely of candy. And she introduces herself as a candy golem named Gumdrop. And she says, I think you're wonderful, and we're going to be your friends, and I'm going to be your maid, and whatnot. And at the beginning, the main character is pretty cynical, and she thinks, oh, this is some sort of trap set up by the witch who lives down the street who has it out for me. I bet that's what's going on here. You got sent over as a trap, and something bad is going to happen. So get out here, go back home to your witch master. And Gumdrop, the candy golem, is trying to tell her, no, that's not how it is. And the main character's friend is also trying to convince her, maybe we should keep her around and be her friend and stuff. You know how many visual novels tend to have pointless choices?
Uh-huh.
Like, where it's just whether the main character says, like, yes, but all right. Those kinds of stuff.
Yeah, true.
Mm-hmm.
True.
Syrup in the Ultimate Suite does tend to have those, but a few of them, for whatever reason, will just commit to the bit. So like there's a choice.
okay.
Yeah, there's a choice early on where like the main character can say it's like, all right, we'll keep her, or you can say, no, she needs to leave, and you expect it to be like, oh, if I pick no, the story's just gonna forcibly loop me back, and we're gonna say yes, because that's how the story kicks off, right? Like we've all been around the block a few times. We know how visual novels work. And that's how several choices are in Syrup in the Ultimate Suite. But like I said, a few of them, like this one, you can pick no, and the story will go ahead with the main character dragging her across the street to the witch's house. And of course, the witch doesn't know what's going on, but she goes with the flow because she kind of sees what's in it for her. Okay. And yeah, the story keeps going, and you think, oh my god, this is kind of bad end material. And you'll actually have lasting effects. I don't want to get too much more into it because, like I said, there's a few times like that. But it's very funny how if you just go out on a limb, sometimes the VN will just call your bluff and you will go down some obviously bad paths in life.
Okay.
But like I said, most of the time it just loops you back to being the lighthearted, friendly-ish kind of material. But still.
That's a very interesting example.
Yes.
I have to say.
It's very funny and it caught me off guard and it's always stuck in my mind since.
I definitely didn't think that's the direction that it will take. Given the title name of Syrup and the Ultimate Suite, I was wholly expected but ending of a more comedic nature, like I like salt, kind of peak, right? In a choice like that.
Mm-hmm.
But honestly enough, as a parallel to our favorite bad endings, how about the most detestable, the ones which just like when we remind ourselves of them, like, oh my god, I hate that, how that developed.
Yeah, like
for me,
like the bad endings that just pissed you off the most, not because it was meant to piss you off, but just because like story, what the hell am I reading?
Exactly. So my example that stuck with me, how stupid it is, from Everlasting Summer. So it's free VN, free on Steam. You can download it, etc. And it has the style of a Mareeck, but the theme of the VN is about the mystery. You got to the summer camp that is shrouded in mystery, and there are a few heroines you can interact with and score affection points. And the way how it unwinds, it by the end of a common route, if you have enough affection points, you enter someone's route, right? So this is the first threshold you pass. But there's a second threshold. If you don't have enough affection points past that, you get a bad ending. Okay? So think about this. You need to have, let's say, 4 affection points to enter a route, but if you don't score at least 6, you get a bad ending. So there's another threshold of good enough to enter, but not good enough to get a good ending.
Wait, and you have to get these affection points just from the common route?
Yes.
What? That doesn't make any sense. That's what the character route is for.
Yes, exactly. But in this title, the character route is more about the conclusion from the common route and the amount of affection points you scored. And the most hilarious part that the one character that stuck with me the most is the ending wasn't, for the majority of characters, the ending is like whether or not you get together or maybe you just split after the trip, something like that. Somewhat neutral, not that dramatic. Okay?
Okay.
But for that one character, if you score enough points, you get into her route. But if you don't, she will, at some certain point in the story, commit suicide. And what stuck with me, and why it's so funny, is the last affection point that determines that split is whether or not you lost on purpose with a card game with her. If you don't lose on purpose, she will commit suicide. Otherwise, she'll like, yeah, I'll live happily ever after with you.
Oh, that's the break. That's always the danger with affection points.
So you're telling me all the affection points are quite obvious because you're a gamer, you know how VNs work, you have your target locked in, you know what to pick. But then it's a small gameplay section, like a tournament of card games, and if you just so happen to win with her in a card game, she will like, no, I can't live with you anymore. Like, what?
It could be any one of those little instances, and it's like, apparently that was the difference.
Yeah, that's the deal breaker. Sorry, bye.
Oh my gosh. That's always risky trying to use affection points.
Yes, exactly.
Well, I guess for me, I should say, there's a VN called Soul Link, which is a sci-fi story about the main character and the group of military personnel on a spaceship, and then it gets attacked, and oh boy, action and dangerous stuff. And there's a few bad endings, and a lot of them are just, it's over, whatever. Some of them are actually really cool, and then there are some of them that are just nasty 18 plus stuff. And I'm like, oh man, what are we doing here? It's like we couldn't have put all this time and effort into like something in the main storyline or fleshing out some other scenes, and it's like, oh no, okay, this is just gonna be one hell of a downer, nothing burger ending to leave off on. Okay.
Yeah, I got you.
The perils of a visual novel. Such is life. It sucked. It had a lot of other good parts to it, but oh well.
Yeah, true.
And that will have to be the end of our episode. Thank you. Yes, thank you everyone for listening. Hope you enjoyed it, and also let us know about any cool bad endings you've seen in visual novel titles, or maybe the kind of stuff you're looking for in bad endings.
Exactly. I look forward to reading all of those, and hopefully to all our listeners, this ending wasn't a bad one. VNture out.
VNture out.